Excellent. So welcome to tonight's tasting. So my name is Liz Whedon. Absolutely fantastic to have you all online, and I certainly am really looking forward to this tasting. Tell you a little bit more about the tasting in a second, but did just want to say to you, if you have not done so already, we are going to taste through each of the producers' estate or main or whatever we want to refer to it as wine, and the first one will be that one there, which is Mount Edward. So it's Duncan's wine. It is a good idea to undo the top of them at the least, but ideally put them into the bottle. So just the way that we seal them does make them needing a little bit of air to express themselves. So at least get the first one sorted there, and then we will talk you through it. So tonight's tasting, when this concept was first presented to me, I think the person sort of introducing it to me, who actually is on the tasting tonight, James, I could see him getting ready. He was going to give me this big spiel about how exciting this project is. And he got like one sentence into it, and I just said, yep, we'll do it. And I think it was a little bit of a disappointment at the time, because he perhaps had a lot more that he wanted to say about it. But anyway, what it's about is it's 4 winemakers who are all with us tonight, and 4 winemakers that have got together and made a wine off the same piece of dirt in Central Otago. And I think, you know, when we talk particularly about Burgundy, and I want to bring up Burgundy so we can get that out of the way really quickly. But, you know, we often talk about villages, and we talk about vineyards, and we talk about the impact of F.W.A and where the grapes are growing. But I think the thing that we often overlook is the people that make the wine and those that grow the grapes and the impact that they have. And the more I've thought about this project, I get really excited about it, because I think the concept of taking, you know, not just 4 winemakers, but 4 fantastic New Zealand winemakers and giving them grapes off the same vineyard and saying, you know, do your worst, is just really going to highlight to us what is that impact that they then have on taking those grapes and crafting them into what they think is the best expression from that site. So what we're going to do tonight, we're joined by Ben. I'll unmute you actually, Ben. We're joined by Ben Glover, and Ben is our sole Marlborough representative. He was going to confuse us immensely and get to Central Otago to join the others, but it seems work is needed to be done in the vineyard, I'm told. So Ben, welcome.
Cheers, Liz, thank you.
And then under the guise of Duncan, all called the same name on your screen tonight, we have Duncan from Mount Edward, we have SK from Maude, and we have Matt from Dicey. And yes, it's a little bit unusual for us Aucklanders, but they're all sort of semi-inside. You know, they're even hugging. I mean, you know, we're looking forward to that tomorrow. But they're all based down in Central Otago, and we're going to hand over to them first. But what I will just do is, just in terms of the format of the tasting, we're going to hear from the team in Central first up to talk to us about the concept and why they decided to do this. Then from Duncan on the vineyard itself. And then what we will do is we will taste through each of the producers their 2019 wine. So their wine that they put out under their own label. And they'll introduce themselves and their style and their wine. So we'll do that as the first flight. And then what we'll do as flight 2 is look at all of their Pisa vineyard wines, so that you get the opportunity to then see those same producers, but making something off the same site. So the bottles, when you look at them, Regan and I'll help identify which one you should be tasting at any time. But if you want to get it sort of sorted now, you'll see in your booklet, the one that is the bottle in the picture is going to be in flight 1. And the one that is just the label is going to be in flight 2. That's also indicated on your tasting mat. This is the hardest part of virtual tastings. It's working out how to get the right wine in the right glass. But we'll help you out as we go along. So should we hand to you guys down in Central?
Absolutely. Welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us in this sort of balmy late spring Central Otago day. I think we've got another 4 hours of sunlight yet to have down here. So endure. So hopefully a little bit comes your way. Look, I'll start off. Wine is such an individual thing. It's one of the best thing. It's one of the best things about wine, in that all of the wines that you can grow from a vineyard and that you make as a winemaker no one else can replicate, and that you have your own little individual stamp. At the same time, it's as Liz was alluding to in her comments about Burgundy, it's also something that wine has markers, and vineyards have markers of how you can identify wines and where they come from. And this is something that many of us all know. And so given a chance to be able to make a wine from the same vineyard amongst a bunch of friends, which is probably even more daunting because we all know each other so well, was an opportunity that none of us really wanted to pass up. You don't really get that opportunity. The sharing of vineyards isn't necessarily a common thing in New Zealand. Generally, people have their own vineyards and their own patch. And so you have to really think about it and give yourself a lot of time in order to do this, but also do it in such a way that everybody has an equal share of the grapes and an equal opportunity to produce a wine that has both their mark on it and the mark of the vineyard. So for us, F.W.A, it's Friends with Attitude. It's free water available if you've had all the wine, and it's fine wine. Actually, you'll see all that on the box, hopefully. But it was such a great opportunity to work together in an industry in a way that often we don't see each other or actually get to work with each other. Certainly not over harvest. We're all stuck in our little wineries.
For us, Pinot is always as a producer, Pinot Noir is a really collaborative conversation. So we all get together and talk all the time about how we make wine and what we do to make wine. But we're always talking about that from a really individual standpoint, as Duncan sort of points out. So to actually change that from an individual standpoint and then throw a commonality in there at the vineyard and have that something that we can all have a go at, really was a lovely point of difference, especially when it was, it was going to be fisticuffs. It was going to be, right, this is the fight club. What are you going to do? How are you going to do it? So there's definitely a little bit of trash talk in there, which Duncan's really good at.
But none of that was true. Don't listen to this one. I mean, I think when you do take something like this on, for us also as winemakers, there's an element in there that we actually want to take something away as well. We want to, it's very collaborative. We are mates first and foremost, and this hasn't been something that we have taken on and done instantly. We've been talking about this for years. It's just a shame Ben Glover's not here on the couch beside us, because there's often 4 of us sitting on the couch at the end of a party talking about what we could do. But I think from a winemaking perspective or wine growing perspective, it's really lovely to have that collaborative approach between the 4 of us to look at these wines now and talk about how we made them each individually from exactly the same parcel of fruit. I think that's one thing that possibly could be clarified, is that it wasn't just the fruit from the same vineyard, it was actually identical clones and bins of fruit that went to each of us. So there was exactly the same parcel of fruit that went 4 different destinations, and then we all put our individual mark on it and have tasted throughout the year to see how everyone's is doing and what we felt about it, and learnt something ourselves from it as well.
We're very inclusive here as well in Central Otago, which is why you have somebody from Marlborough come along. And so may I introduce the 4th member of the group who's just about to say something, Mr. Ben Glover.
The wayward travelling minstrel. Yeah, look, I agree. I think we've just added a couple of more dimensions to why everyone enjoys wine, because often it's just around sharing experiences. And we've probably just added not unbeknowing, I suppose, to begin with, just added a few more layers to what wine does to a conversation or to an experience or sharing. So instead of, as SK said, late one night on a couch talking about it, we've just taken it a step further and realised it. And I think that's another great thing about good mates. Often we'll say yes first and then work out how to do it and how to achieve it. And it's been fantastic to be able to, in the middle of the night, steal some fruit out of Central, bring it up to Marlborough, and then try and work out what these three ruffians are doing with it over the last 18 months while I've headed up here in the Marlborough region. So, and the only disappointment is I don't get down to Central as much as I'd love, because it's a fantastic, just like Marlborough, it's a fantastic area for grape growing, but mates, and also to enjoy. So I'm looking forward to this evening, seeing how these fall out.
So I guess we start. I'll start talking about the vineyard. So the vineyard is one of our vineyards. It was first planted in 2002. So just under 20 years old, which is when a vineyard sort of matures. And basically, probably from about 15 years onwards, when a vineyard matures, what happens is the vines tend to produce grapes on a very even basis. So not only as a plant do they produce fruit year on year in an even way, but also the flavors and the textures and the markers that start to define a vineyard. When you talk about in a single vineyard and you talk about wines that have these markers to them, they start to become much more apparent, and they start to become year after year quite similar. So when you produce a wine from a very young vineyard, often all you get is very fruit-driven wines. So the people who were drinking Central Otago wines sort of 15 years ago, or 15 or 20 years ago, they were very fruit-driven wines, and they often had a little bit of sameness to them. And no different than winemakers as you start developing your own style, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we taste each other's estate wines, but also a vineyard starts to develop a style and those markers of its own. So this particular vineyard, Pisa Terrace, it's on a terrace, to go figure. It's at about 300 meters, which is about sort of 40 above sea level. It's about sort of 30 or 40 meters higher than some of the vineyards in the Cromwell Basin. And the Cromwell Basin is where the majority of fruit comes from. So you have Bendigo, you have Bannockburn, you have Pisa, and that's sort of the basin in a nutshell. And of that, Pisa is probably one of the earlier ripening areas. Often the wines from this area are driven by acidity and have very sort of red fruited tones to them. Pisa Terrace, our vineyard, it's been, as I said, planted in 2002, 2003. It's been organic since day one. And because of its elevation, I guess, it's been a vineyard that has a very aromatic and perfumed marker to it from day one. And for us, it's been the backbone of a lot of Mount Edward wines. So for me, I guess I start with an advantage to my friends, because I know the vineyard a little bit. They would say too much of an advantage. But when you know something very well, and you know the style of wine that comes off it, often you only talk or you make a wine according to the things that you have always seen. So I would argue coming at it with a fresh face is actually an advantage. So I was probably in the toughest position of all of us.
Yeah, three others might disagree with me. Yeah.
But it's a very well-known vineyard in Central Otago for those who produce Pinot. It has a tiny amount of Riesling. Otherwise, it's got about 10 or 12 hectares of just Pinot Noir. It's predominantly planted in Dijon clones. A clone in Pinot Noir is like a clone in apples. They all taste slightly differently. They have different tannin. They have different fruit, but they're all Pinot. And it's just getting into that sort of 20-year-old mark. So as I said, That means basically the wines have they have a regularity in terms of the markers and the fruit characteristics and what they can bring to a wine. Perfect. Okay.
Very good. Absolutely perfect. So what we'll do now, so that gives you a bit of an idea of the project in the vineyard. What we're going to look at first in this first flight is each of the producers, the wine that would be their estate wine, or what they bottle and put out under their own label. And we'll start with Mount Edward. So you need to have in your glass, find my right camera there, you need to have that little one. And Duncan will get you to tell us about Mount Edward and about your 2019 Pinot Noir.
Okay, so you've got your little version of this, hopefully. This is just released. We tend to keep our wines for probably about a year in bottle, and we find that it just sort of helps settle the wine down. Often a younger wine can be a little bit edgy. And I guess for us as a style, I like texture in wine, and I like softness and suppleness. And so our estate wine, we always try and have that as its mainstay. As a winemaker, you get to define the style of your house or your winery. And what you do in terms of the making of that, it's no different than a restaurant or anywhere you go that has a markers of individual style. As a winery, you get to decide how the wine tastes in a broad brush way. And as a consumer, that's where you get to start identifying what people do and what you like. And so for us, what we're trying to do with this wine is really concentrate on the texture. In Central Otago, you have a lot of fruit, and that can be fantastic for wines if they're very fruit driven. For us, we feel as though that should be part of the wine and be very much fit in the background. So what we hope you taste when you taste this is all about suppleness and texture rather than fruit, rather than tannin. And it's driven by, has all of those things, but its primary guide, I guess, is in its texture.
Cool. Can you tell us just a little bit about Mount Edward? Sort of when was it established, and how long you've been doing this, Duncan?
Oh, absolutely. Well, like all of us, my whole productive life, I had a few formative years where I wasn't working, let's say, but they probably involved wine as well. Yeah. Look, man,
the photo comes from one of those formative years, and people might have seen the photo on the box of Duncan. It's definitely a formative years photo.
COVID has been tough on many people, I would just like to say. And if you look at the photo, you can see no different. This is now a COVID haircut, and I may have put on the odd year. It's very harsh sunlight in Central Otago, which isn't good for your complexion either, I'd have to say. Look, Mount Edward's 22 years old. We had the pleasure of buying it, myself and my business partner, in 2003. Prior to that, I had worked at Chard Farm in Peregrine in my formative, winemaking years. And we took over Mount Edward when it was a tiny little place. It was 500 cases of wine, and we sold, I think, probably only into the UK. And certainly my next call was probably to Liz at Glengarry going, help me, I've got no idea what I'm doing. And we started off with 500 cases, and we've now we had one small vineyard by the winery. So winery is in Gibbston, which is 20 odd minutes away from Queenstown, and we've moved. We now have 4 vineyards, and all in the Cromwell Basin, and that's where I live. In Bannockburn, we have 2 vineyards in Bannockburn, one on Felton Road and one on Kemure Road, and then 2 vineyards on Pisa, one of which you're tasting tonight. We've been organic since 2006, and really, I guess, as a winery, we would consider ourselves relatively progressive. And what does that mean? I guess that just means we're not afraid to make a few mistakes and change our style and what we do. So hopefully this Pinot Noir is probably not as fruit driven as some people would recognize Central Otago, but that in effect is probably reflective of our style, and we don't mind being slightly left of centre of what people's expectations are.
Oh, very good. Well, I can tell you, even in a very small bottle and all the way up here in Auckland, it's looking fantastic, Duncan. Is it looking good in Marlborough, Ben?
I don't know if it's travelled that well, Liz.
So now we know who stirs the trouble in the group. I think we knew that already, though.
Lovely texture, lovely texture.
Yeah, texture is a great word for it, isn't it? Very cool. Okay, so what we'll do now is you need to pour it into your second glass, the one that says Zephyr. And we're going to head to Marlborough. And Ben, do you want to tell us all about Zephyr and your Pinot?
Yes, I can. It's probably the odd one of the four, really, because obviously it's not a central Pinot Noir. It's out of Marlborough, out of the Southern Valleys. So clay-based, so the hillside slope, west-facing, so not directly north-facing. I'm not a big fan of too much direct sunlight, but I am a fan of some slope work and some aspect. So planted probably in the early to mid 2000s, just when the Southern Valleys were starting to get planted out, and that was all around due to finally getting our hands on water through that valley system, through the Southern Valleys waterway. So there's not a natural aquifer there in the Southern Valleys, unlike the Wairau plain itself. So that's where Zephyr gets its Pinot Noir from. Zephyr is my own brand, family owned, and I suppose in family vineyards, predominantly aromatics and Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, and then the odd Sauvignon Blanc, if I can find it. So I suppose the adage around Pinot Noir is really to express, as Duncan talked about, the Pisa piece. You're really expressing the site. So it's a single vineyard site. And I think Marlborough itself tends to be sort of almost, if you think about 8-gauge train tracks running down your palate, very true parallel tannin and acid structure. And if you can build around that, you'll have some lovely vibrancy, succulence. Probably there's not as much texture and you see in Duncan's expression of his central piece, but I'm more happy to see a bit of acidity. Pinot Noir should make you dance, and acidity keeps everything light and vibrant, helps with foods, cutting through any foods and stuff like that. But certainly Marlborough is predominantly probably cherry based if you think about a fruit spectrum, but that can be anywhere from chalky to dense, dark, black, brooding, or bright reds. So if I can pick up those type of characters through there and a bit more nuance or a few more layers on the nose and on the palate, I'm happy. But it's got to leave, I suppose, refreshing and wanting more. So Zephyr's been around since its first vintage in 2008. And prior to that, I probably cut my teeth at Wither Hills for about 15 years. And I think, and then so that put me in some pretty good stead in regards to some early days of Pinot out of Marlborough, as well as the other usual varietal suspects.
What we all want to know though, Ben, is how come you're charging so much less than those central guys? Oh, you're giving it away.
Yeah, I know. Work on it, Regan.
Well, we'll do it cheap for everyone at the tasting, then we'll put the price up next week.
I thought it was reassuringly expensive.
Very good. Ben, we've just had a comment here just on the real savoury edge to the Marlborough Pinot, and in a positive way, which, yeah, stylistically, I mean, that's a great start to a tasting because we're seeing two very, very different regional expressions. Can you just tell us where does the name Zephyr come from?
Look, it's way back then. It was the last word in the thesaurus. It wasn't trademarked. But Zephyr's the Greek god of wind, so it's a play on words, but a poetic license in regards to the prevailing winds in Marlborough that sort of moderate the valley floor and give us lovely, bright, fresh flavours and aromas, but they don't overcook it. So that wind certainly, particularly easterly, certainly moderates it. So we get lovely fruit, but not overcooked, not warm, not hot.
Yeah, and I think definitely, the acidity in your wine and just that freshness does leave you wanting to go back for another glass of it, which is what we all want to see. It's a good thing with wine. Right, before we move to SK, just Duncan, we had a comment on your wine, and it is from a fellow winemaker who's on the call tonight, who says it looks smart, a great wine. So there you go.
Smart. Nobody's ever called me that.
No, I know, it's why the comments stood out
Very
to me.
kind.
Okay, folks, what you need to do now is you should have a little bottle that looks like that says Maude on it. You want to pour that into a glass if you've not done so already. And we're going to hear from SK.
Thanks, Liz. So, the wine Maude, which is our 2019 Pinot. We have been selling it for a little while. My husband and I came back from making wine in Australia and set up a winery in Wanaka in 2005. So that Wanaka is our base. But my folks actually planted a vineyard in the Mungawera Valley, which is just north of Wanaka. And that was in 1994. So they were one of the early guys as well. And we love having the Mount Maude vineyard as our reserve wines or as individual little parcels. But probably one of our favourite wines to actually make and put together is this Maude Pinot. You know, so many times we talk a lot about individual vineyards and learning that vineyard and actually moulding a wine that speaks of its place. Well, this Maude Pinot is made up of two different vineyards, and they are quite distinctly different. One is our Mohawk Hill, which is right in Lowburn, and a little bit like the Pisa Terrace, the vineyards in Central Otago. You might correct me if I'm wrong, but on our Lowburn vineyard, we find that the nor'wester, which blows and blows in Central Otago, hasn't blown all the topsoil off that side of the Pisa or in Lowburn. And so the vineyards actually have soil, and they offer a little bit more generosity, if you like, to those wines. There's a depth of fruit there that sometimes you don't see in other parts of Central Otago. And we really enjoy that from the Mohawk Hill vineyard. The second vineyard is Poison Creek, which is in Queensbury. So on its way to Wanaka, about 20 minutes out of Wanaka, coming towards Cromwell, and quite a bit more elevated, so sitting 270 up round there. But it is quite a cooler site. And with that, we find we get these beautiful purity of fruit, like beautiful aromatics, and a little bit more time for the grapes to ripen on the vine, which we enjoy because we like to include all the whole bunches in the ferments. But also with it, you have a tannin structure to the wine. So I think Ben mentioned the train tracks and things like that. So you get that structure that comes from Poison Creek that can really tighten up the Lowburn or the Mohawk Hill vineyard. So it's always, every year it's one. It takes us about 4 days of tasting. And the lovely thing is working out this wine that at the end of the day, and it might be, I think it's about 180 barrels, this blend, but it might be down to half a barrel of one vineyard versus the other. And we can go, yep, that looks like Maude. And I think that's quite a cool thing. And Duncan touched on it before, how, the winemaker does have an influence into the style. And for a wine like this, we really want this style of Maude to sing. And we love those two vineyards to be able to be the vehicle for us to do that. For us, Pinot, our Maude Pinot, we love to be aromatic. So perfume violets, a little bit of that pine needles on the forest floor kind of character, often a bit of mushroom, all those lovely aromatics. And then hopefully you can see the generosity that comes from the Mohawk Hill vineyard, but being pulled in by the more tannin structure that comes from the cooler climate of Poison Creek. So it's a joy to make. We love it. Hopefully you do.
Before I say anything about the wine, I have to ask, where on earth do those vineyard names come from?
So,
I mean, really?
So in Melbourne, when you stand on the vineyard at Mohawk Hill, and we have a single vineyard of this, and you look out towards Lake Dunstan, it's a hill. Oh, it's actually been called Stegosaurus Ridge as well, and it's the sugar loaf, and there's a row of pines that grows directly down one side of it. And apparently the story goes, the legend goes, that when the dam workers were there building the dam, they used to make a marker and say that they would be meeting up at Mohawk Hill for that reason, have a beer after work or something like that. And Poison Creek is actually our vineyard in Queensbury is very much on a river terrace, completely reliant on water, wouldn't survive without it. And the water comes from two sources. One comes from the Clutha River, but the preferred one is the fresh mountain snow melt, basically, that comes down the Criffle, and we take from over that side. So that's
perfect. Excellent. And I think we can safely say we've got some people here who are going to head down and see you as soon as they can, because someone's just commented, if we could just ask Sharon to bring the food menu, we're ready for our croquettes now.
Yes, that would be at our Maude tasting room. Please come and see us anytime.
Yeah, just a comment here, which is lovely, says the lovely elegance of the Maude, a ballerina with great acidity.
Thank you.
Yeah, very nice. No, it's looking lovely.
My skirt and everything will fly above.
Really good wine, SK. Thank you. Right, so shall we taste the fourth one here? What do you reckon? So what you need to do is, this will look like this. So it'll be the Dicey one that has two different colours. The two Dicey ones look a little bit similar. Make sure you've got two colours on this one, and then you're looking at the right wine. So, perfect. Matt, tell us all about this.
Okay, so this is our 2019 Dicey Bannockburn Pinot. This is our first iteration. Our first Pinot is Dicey. So maybe a little intro as to who Dicey is. My folks arrived here in the early 90s and planted some vineyards in Bannockburn and Felton Road. And my first experience down here was in 92, planting vineyards, and I came back in 98 and set up a little winery, and then started sort of as a contract winemaker, and then spent sort of 22 years working for Mount Difficulty. And in 2002 was lucky enough to buy a plot of land, and my brother also bought a plot of land, both of them in Kenmure. So we planted both of those. James and Adele planted the inlet, and Alice and I planted the Black Rabbit, and those are two of the components within this wine. And we started making wine from there in 2006, and we made wine as under a different label series from 2006 through to 2018, and then we decided it was time to, that wasn't really working, and we wanted to change the dynamic a little bit, and I was leaving my previous role and going to jump hands into this. So we rebranded as Dicey, and this was the inaugural wine that we kicked off with in February. So this has been in the market since February, and we're just coming to the end of the sales for this 2019. A little bit like SK and the Maude. This is a blend of two of the family vineyards, as I said before, the Inlet and Black Rabbit. They very similar to Mohawk Hill and Poison Creek. They offer completely different and contrasting styles, which we get to put together and fashion something which, as SK says, you get to to formulate your own destiny a little bit. And it gives a lovely purity and persistence and velvety texture. And that's James and Adele's vineyard. And for us, the two vineyards are side by side. They're both on the Bannockburn Inlet. So as you drive around Kenmure, you come to the Bannockburn Inlet. James's vineyard pretty much is on the terrace just above the inlet, so rolls from about 220, 230 meters up to about 240 meters. And it's sort of pretty much river gravels with a little bit of outwash from the Gibson Glacier. So reasonably young soils, but they have a little bit more of that sort of soil within them, and they give a little bit more plushness and richness and vibrancy. And then looking immediately opposite, so they face north, and then across the Bannockburn is the Black Rabbit. And that's on northeast facing slopes, but much higher, sort of stretching from 260 up to 310 meters above sea level. And that's on much older soil, so sort of ancient bedrock, 300-400 million years old. And that always gives a much more savory bent, much more structural, and really does provide a little bit of the sort of the savory backbone to this wine. And very much like what Esko was talking about, we really do look for layers and complexity and interest, and build those in by looking at the sort of the balance of those two things, and trying to get those elements to come from the two different vineyards, and really build some lovely velvety texture, look at some complexity, so some beautiful fruit aromatics, but some savory notes, and then really love the purity, but also the structural element that seems to come from Bannockburn as well. So there's always this lovely sort of natural structure that we get, and a little bit, as Duncan said, we're getting a little bit of vine age, just shy of 20 years. So that is something which seems to come with a little bit of time as well. So that's 2019 Bannockburn Pinot from Dicey.
Delicious.
That was a long, good explanation.
Yeah.
Right.
I like the way he
I liked it. I know.
Who were you, Ben?
I know.
Sorry, Ben. I should have thrown that in there as well. I'm sure I could have.
Very good. No, wonderful explanation. And I think looking at the four wines, four very, very different wines. We have a question here. SK talked about whole bunch. Would be interested to understand what others do and what oak regimes you're using for each of your wines. So shall we look back to you, Duncan, and go whole bunch and oak? What are you doing?
We're allowed to yellow card that.
That's a winemaker question for sure.
Well, yeah, it's not a winemaker asking it, so we're not allowed to yellow card it, I'm afraid.
No, but I'll explain it in a little way. I guess when you make wine, you can take all the bunches off and you just have little berries. And when you do that, the wine is very plush and fruit scented. So it highlights the fruit. When you add bunches to your wine, so the actual bunches that the grapes hang on to, when you throw those in, it's like making a slightly bigger skeleton. You draw out tannin to the wine. So the wine has a slightly bigger skeleton to it. If you make wine with 100% whole bunches, so your whole tank is nothing but that, actually the berries actually ferment within themselves, and they actually give you a very it's called carbonic, and it gives you a very lifted, voluminous feel in your mouth. So you get very mouth-filling wine that's a little bit lighter on its feet. So that's a tool as winemakers that you can use. For us in the Mount Edward, it's almost all destemmed, because we're wanting to make something that's very plush and soft. And in terms of new oak, we use very little as well. I think new oak in Central Otago is something that can stand on a wine quite quickly. And so for us, we use 15%, which is probably at the low end of what you do. So you get a little bit of tannin and just a little bit of oak flavor, be it spicy, be it vanilla, that sort of thing.
Very cool. Yeah. And thank you. And SK, what you talked about what you did, so it's okay, you've already got a tick. And let's go to Matt. What do you do?
So we're about 20-25% whole bunch, a little bit more of the whole bunch coming through in there. but very similar on the oak. We're about 18% new oak in there. So again, agree with Duncan. Too much is too much.
Excellent. And Ben, do you do anything different to these guys up in Marlborough?
No, I learned everything off them, really. I'm just an imposter, Liz. So the oak comment, I think in the early days when the vines were young, you needed oak to help with structure and length. And as the vines got older, they don't need that support and they end up fighting with it. So I'm around 15% new and starting to look at a bit more large format and holding an older oak. Whole bunch, yeah, about 15 to 20% as well. I'm just looking for a bit more sinewy savouriness outside of that sort of the fruit-derived stuff from, say, crush or destemmed fruit.
Excellent, thank you. Now we've got some comments coming through here. Araha Jugicevic has joined us tonight. Thanks for joining us, Araha. Araha's comment is very beautiful wines, looking forward to the next round. And then Marianne, who's online, has said, all lovely wines, Maude for me, sorry boys. There we go. So round one, perhaps to SK, maybe? No, all
Love
very,
that.
Marianne.
all
Argue with SK,
fantastic.
so she's won anyway.
Cool. Okay, so what we're going to do now is everyone needs to get the wines in the right order. So what you're looking at now is the next lot of wines from the same order that we just did, and you're looking for this one first. Okay, so did everyone get that? So a little one there. I won't say the little one with a black label because there's a couple with black labels there. And if you do have 4 glasses and can pour all of these out, oh, sorry. Actually, before I keep going, SK, we've just had another vote for your wine from round 1.
Stop it. Stop it.
Who's all the people coming down for lunch that you've paid for?
Yeah.
free lunch. Free lunch.
Okay.
It's very good like that, actually. If you say, I love Maude, there's free croquettes with every glass of wine.
Okay, so we've got this. We've got this one first, and then you want the one that says Mr. Glover in your next glass. And then you want the one that is completely black, so the Maude next. And the last one that you want in glass number 4 is the one that looks like that. Okay, so you've got little pictures in your book that will help you with getting that right as well. Okay, so now we have the 4 wines all off the same vineyard. Okay, we've got more comments coming through, but they're all of the same vein. So let's go back to you, Duncan.
Yeah. What do you mean they're all of the same vein? Yeah. Put your hands up. Yeah.
No, I think there's just a comment that says let's see how everyone goes in the next round and then we can decide.
Yeah. Okay. Look, this is when you start tasting these wines, the first thing I guess to note is that this vineyard, how we would view it typically, and the vineyard often is very aromatic. So when we look at our blends and we look at the vineyard, typically it's the most aromatic and the most perfumed of all our wines, and that's a marker for the vineyard. It's also it has a very light tannin structure to it. It doesn't naturally have a lot of tannin to it, and it often has a really nice vein of acidity. So the wines generally aren't big, rich, ripe wines. These are much more sort of ethereal, pretty style of wines coming from this vineyard. So that should be a commonality. There should be a commonality of those things across these 4 wines. How then you influence it is up to the 4 of us. For us, we wanted to accent the sort of soft plushness, but make it very sort of big in your mouth. So very voluminous, but yet light. somebody asked the question about whole bunches. Half of the wine that we made in this wine was 100% whole bunch, and what that does is give you very lifted mouthfeel. So it's very light, and we wanted to try and accentuate that. At the same time, we wanted our signature, if you like, or what we like in a wine, the soft texture as well. So half of the wine was destemmed, and then half of the wine was 100% whole cluster. In doing that, we wanted to make a wine that was very aromatic, that was very soft and supple, and almost was a bit too light on its feet. So nothing that had a lot of tannin to it. And we have great croquettes too.
What a great place to start, Duncan.
Thank you. I think that's all we've got time for tonight. So thank you everybody for joining us.
Yeah, we've just had a comment come in here that, you know, love the freshness on it. I think also your discussion around the perfume from this vineyard, you know, we're seeing that really clearly on your wine, which is beautiful. Right, so should we keep going through them?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's lots of requests here for the food as we're going. So SK. Oh no, sorry, not SK. Next we're going to Ben. How did I miss you, Ben? It's because you're not in Central.
Yeah, I know. It's a hologram. So this is a sort of a cheeky read I've done under Mr. Glover brand, which is just sort of almost a caricature really of me, and it allows me to go and have a look at other blocks outside of Marlborough. The Zephyr brand is family owned, family vineyard. So you know, Central Pinot or Hawke's Bay can't sit there. So the Mr. Glover piece just allows me to have a bit of a play and explore, come down and see these rat bags and tell a few stories and swap a few lies. So it was a pleasure to get this fruit up to Marlborough from Duncan. Now, when Duncan said everything was even and correct, and you know we all got exactly the same, he just rang us and said it's on its way. I've picked it. Fuck you all. I've made the picking decision, and here it's coming. So 2 days later, the fruit arrived, and in really good condition though. So nice work. And being a bit hands off or out of region, I didn't do too much to this. Two ferments, one with a bit more whole bunch and one without. And I suppose I was looking for some of that more sort of chalky structural character and a bit more, I suppose, the ethereal notes and aromas coming through. So really, I suppose, probably with a Marlborough hat on, really trying to hold on to some of those reds that you see, but also trying to see some sinewyiness through the palates and just acidity, but some quite chewiness and line and length and nice reds. So sort of almost chalky through that tannin profile.
Beautiful, Ben.
Yeah.
Not bad for a Marlborough, right?
Yeah, you've learned quite a lot. I mean, you know, still a long way to go, but it's pretty.
Yeah, exactly.
I like it because
for improvement.
It's got plenty of the high tone fruit in it, and it's very soft. But as you say, you brought a little structural element to it that certainly we don't have. So you know, almost, you know, it holds tannin in a wine is almost like pastry in a pie. It sort of holds it together, and so it's beautifully well held. All of those sort of red fruits to it.
Definitely.
How long ago were these bottled, guys? Like, is it reasonably recent bottlings? Like, have you had a good chance to try through all of these before, or was this one of the first times you're trying all four together?
Ben doesn't like sharing, so this is actually the first time we've tried Ben's wine. The rest of us, we've been drinking ours a lot.
Fantastic.
But we keep ringing Ben saying, Ben, are we allowed to try yours yet?
To be honest,
this is the first time I'm trying these wines.
Yeah.
It's been bottled about 12 months, Regan, that wine of mine.
Yeah, all of the wines are pretty similar in that respect. We all bottled the wines at pretty much the same time. Basically, and it was part of the and to endeavour to give it the best possible chance for all of them to have an even keel. So picked at the same time, as we've said. All of the lots were divided evenly at the same time. As much as I made that picking decision, it was very fair. It was much fairer than I actually wanted to be. So and then in terms of when we bottled and all that sort of thing. So you're looking at 4 wines that have got the most consistency in terms of the decisions that are outside just winemaking calls.
Oh, very good. We've got a note here, Ben, on yours that it has great personality. No further feedback there?
Really about the winemaker, yeah. Lucky it comes through in the wine, Liz.
No, I think, yeah, your discussion just on the tannins, and I particularly like that sort of sinewy reference to it because, you know, there is that character really strongly through it. And I think, you know, so far there's a commonality between these as well, which I'm assuming we're going to see as we keep going, but that's really good too. But yeah, different expressions. So on that, we'll come back, I think, over the whole 4 and talk about them collectively. But SK, shall we move to you and what you did with your parcel?
Sure. Because I'm a little bit worried I'm going to be yellow carded from either side here talking about this. But we have a style that we make from our Maude vineyard called East Meets West, and it is 100% carbonic. So all the bunches are going in, and it's basic winemaking neglect where you're leaving the ferment alone for 3 weeks, you know. But one of the precursors that we look for with the fruit is actually a lot of lignified stems and nicely ripened fruit, and everything's in really beautiful condition. And Duncan's not quite telling the truth. We did all come and look at the fruit on the vineyard. So we were having a look at that, and I saw some similarities there to what we have in the vineyard with East Meets West. So we chose a style that might be controversial, if you like. I know with our East Meets West, some people love it, some people hate it. But we're really enjoying our journey with this style, where essentially all the bunches are loaded into a fermenter and it's locked down. So no oxygen's allowed in, forcing the berries to ferment within themselves. And then after about 2.5 to 3 weeks, we will take the lid off, and there'll be 1 foot stop before it's pressed off and sent to barrel. And this, what we really enjoy about it is, yes, you can see a little bit of that like crushed herb like dill and things like that, but there's also these beautiful precursors to the perfume of violets and you know, some darker fruit kind of characters that underlie this, that's not typical. And we quite enjoy that. The other thing we really enjoy with the palate is the softening of it. The fruit looked like there wasn't a huge amount of tannin to it, so we weren't trying to extract that, but we were also just trying to elevate the perfumes and the opulence and the gentleness that we thought probably came from that vineyard. So that's ours.
Just to sort of add in there, when SK talks about a style that people either love or don't love, when you put in 100% whole bunches, it gives you that dill flavor, it gives you that herbal edge. So you have a marker that you introduce into the wine when you make a wine in that style, and that's what really you're referring to. And whether people like that as a little bit or a lot, then I certainly like it a lot. And it just really depends on personal preference.
I also think from all the inclusion of the stalk in there, you also get that you know, cookie dough and spice. You know, you have the slight ginger and, you know, your baking drawer kind of aromatics that come with it as well. It's really intriguing.
It adds a lot.
It adds a lot.
It adds a lot. So you're taking that natural element and you amplify certain
Elements.
components.
Yeah, so
There's definitely a hand of a winemaker in there.
Yeah.
you amplify
Even if
that
it's less.
and you subtract a bit from the fruit.
Yeah.
So you have to decide both from a consumer point of view and from a winemaker point of view, which of those attributes you like. And so if you like things that are fruit driven, then you use less of it. If you like those characteristics, then go for it.
And a bit like Duncan, we're probably a bit left of centre as well.
Very good. Hey, we've got some comments here, as you would expect on this expression, SK. You said it was going to, perhaps divide. But what we've had here, first of all, is love how different the Maude and SK Pisa are in terms of structure and power. Very different stylistically, and great to get the explanation as well. More earthy, dark and savoury versus the delicacy of the Maude, which I think has summed it up.
Well done,
very well.
whoever wrote that.
Yeah. The next one here is that Maude was certainly a lot more floral on the nose versus this one. And I think, yeah, your explanation is great there in terms of why. And just sort of in terms of carbonic as well, that technique, just perhaps to explain, it is very common in the Beaujolais region. So if anyone listening has tasted a lot of Beaujolais Village, then, and particularly in the past, you would have got a lot of carbonic. Interesting, Duncan, you'd probably like the direction that they're going in Beaujolais with less and less carbonic in there and less a whole bunch at the moment, and more fruit.
Yeah, I confirm that. I think that's good direction for Gamay.
Yeah, it is. Ben, did you, before we move on, you're very quiet there. I'm conscious these three are being very noisy. Did you have some comments?
No, we've just tried 3 now, and I think it's quite good to see what SK does with that wine. It's almost, probably get it wrong, but it's not for me like a mahogany sort of character, which is not the varnish piece, but that lovely. It's like a woody structure, but it's not from oak. It's probably from those stalks and the seeds, but they're ripe, and so they really give lovely structure through with that more dried herb and richness. And then the Duncan's wine has got some just lovely plushness to it through the palate and lift. So I think they're all equally really cool examples of what that fruit's delivering.
Cool.
So it's really exciting.
Should we let Matt talk?
I think so.
Let's do that. Matt, let's jump back to you.
Okay, so we decided that we'd try and do something totally different for us, and something you don't really see terribly much in New Zealand, and had an inkling that some of the other friends would be doing a lot of whole bunch. So we thought we'd be very extractive, but go 100% the other way. So we were 100% destemmed, and we threw this into a fermenter, 2 fermenters actually, and then essentially left them for a few days. And then once we got to the point where fermenter just started ticking off, we extracted a little bit of juice, put a lid in that had a hole in the middle of it, and sealed the lid up, and then put the juice back on top, and then allowed the ferment just to run naturally like that with the hole. What would usually people would be punching that down and doing something with the cap. That cap just stayed submerged in the wine. So this wine was never touched, but actually it's quite an extractive technique where effectively you're just letting a ferment do all of the extraction by holding the skin submerged. And the rationale for us, other than just being quite cool and something we've been wanting to do in the winery for a long time, this is often quite sort of fine and filigreed and elegant fruit when we've sort of seen examples of it before. And we wanted to see where you're not crushing the berries at all, the berries are staying intact. So you get very little seed extraction, but you get a lot of extraction from the skin. And because you're introducing no oxygen into the fermentation, it's naturally a really long, slow fermentation. So this ferment just naturally took 21 days. So it's just a really long, slow, natural ferment. As soon as it had gone dry, we pressed the wine off, whereas typically we would leave it and leave it for a few days and muck around with it. So this was just left and fermented, and then just because it was a real beast. It was pretty big and extracted when it came out of ferment, and we didn't feel like it needed any more tannin. So this is just an old oak. So there's no new oak in here whatsoever. So it's just a pure expression of a very extracted expression of exactly the fruit that came from the vineyard from us. And it is just this really, it's quite interesting to sort of see what direction that took it in. It's total polar opposite of
It is, isn't it?
Yeah. You can certainly see the elements of the vineyard in there, and you can see the structural elements, but it is certainly.
And your one has lovely length to it. Like it has a beautiful back palate. Like it's a structure on the back palate. It's not all up front, is it? Like it's actually
it has
changed
the whole dimension of the tannins and stuff. We definitely saw it as extracting, and it extracted a lot of tannin, which was not a surprise, but at the same time there was a lot of fruit volume in there as well. So it definitely did both of those elements at the same time. So we really enjoyed it being thrown there, and really enjoyed doing something for us which was very different.
Yeah, it's a great different technique I think you've done there, Matt. And I haven't tasted anything quite like that, where you've got that extracted dark fruit up front, and there's got that sweetness there. But then the further you get through the palate, the drier and drier it gets. And the finish, like you said, SK, is incredibly long, but it just gets drier and drier on the back of the palate. And it's got this thickness and this texture to it that you don't normally see with that fruit up front. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, I think it comes from there, just this long, slow ferment, and it being such a natural extraction without you introducing any oxygen. So you retain everything all the way through the palate, all the way through tasting it. It had that sort of density, which I think was a bit of a surprise when I sort of saw some of the other ones. That it's definitely changed some of the nature of what we were getting.
Yeah, I think SK right at the beginning talked about how her vineyard on Mohawk Hill has some soil, and when you have a bit of soil in the vineyard, it gives you some fruit weight to a wine. So the heavier the soil, often the more sort of weighty the wine can be. And I think Matt's wine, the Dicey wine, probably of all these wines, ironically has the most weight of fruit. We were certainly trying to make a wine that was a bit more lighter on its feet. I think SK's wine for me is probably the lightest of that, and very ethereal. Ben's has this lovely sort of aromatic fruit component to the wine, and quite structural. And Matt's, ironically, even though probably the most extractive, has probably got the most weight of fruit of all the wines. So yeah, a really nice expression.
Cool. Hey guys, we've got some comments here. So very cool that you went in the other direction, Matt, in terms of berries versus whole bunch. And it shows, and great to be able to connect with the wine. Same in terms of how you manage the extract. Same in terms of how you manage to extract so much colour without tannin due to the submerged cap approach. Very cool. So lovely long comment there, but that's, I think, sums it up nicely. And then John has started this off and says, I prefer the Dicey Pisa for round 2. And another comment here that they all have similarities but wonderful differences. All four are beautiful for me. All four are beautiful, but for me it's Marlborough. So I think it's a vote heading up to you, Ben. Great to see. Oh, okay. So when is the 2020 version of this happening? Brilliant idea and extremely educational. Thanks. And perhaps before we come to what you're going to do from next year, I did have a couple of questions. A couple of questions for you. So Duncan, you've seen fruit obviously off this vineyard when you've been taking it off for a longer time than the others. The others have probably tasted your wine, though, that's come off the vineyard. Are there things that you've seen in what's happened here with this fruit that, you know, we'll perhaps see back in Mount Edward?
He's
Oh, I
actually,
think I'm
he's
not
contracted,
so
he's
long
contracted the
in,
vineyard out to us all, you see.
I think I'm not so long in the tooth that I can't learn a few new tricks. I'd like to think. Look, I think having weight and fruit weight in a wine, yet still being very light, for me is a real positive. And so I think probably the vineyard could handle a bit more extraction. That would be a take home for me. I think in all of the wines you see a very aromatic and lighter red to slightly darker, but more in the red fruit spectrum. And I think Ben's wine sort of exemplified that. So staying with the aromatics is something that we've always been aware of, and this probably highlights. But I think probably that textural component, whether it be fruit weight or from the outer side, whether it's from carbonic, is something that will try and evolve as a winery.
Oh, very good. Sorry, we have to have a question for everyone. Ben, we're going to go to you next. Working with Central Fruit and seeing what these guys have done with it, you know, are there things here that you think you could take back up to Marlborough?
No. Most definitely. Look, I was pretty lucky to be making some Central Pinot when I was at Mudhouse for about 3 or 4 years, and got to really had the chance to catch up with these 3 guys and girls in particular to just learn, and that was brilliant, particularly, you know, coming from out of region. So yeah, you're always picking up things and picking up little bits and bobs, and you know, you've got one vintage every year, so you've got to make the most of what you're picking up and what you're gleaning. But most certainly, I think understanding a whole bunch a bit more out of Marlborough. I mean, interestingly enough, we harvest at the same time, Marlborough and Central, pretty much, but our stalks are quite green, whereas, you know, the stalks in Central have already started to brown off, so that whole bunch pieces can be quite a different nuance than up in Marlborough. And I've got one question too for Matt. You talked about tannin, you know, after that 21 days and pressing it off. Was it quite tannic? And we've seen over the last 12 months, it's really just relaxed off, or was it always this type of supple tannin, but just a lot of it early on?
No, it was really, there was a lot of it, and it was quite aggressive in its youth, and we actually really thought we'd overcooked it. So it's amazing how much it has relaxed and over the time in barrel, and then even now it's definitely changed more than most wines that we make. You know, usually you see that evolution, but this, I think, evolved way more than we typically see.
Yeah,
for sure. So SK, looking at the 4 wines, all very different, obviously the same age though, how do you think all 4 of them are going to look over the next sort of 3 to 5 years? And where do you think yours is going to sit in that? Sorry, a big question for you.
No, I think that's a really interesting question, because for me, the one thing, and I said this to Duncan right at the start, is the Mount Edward had this youth and vibrancy that was this, as he said, much like his photo on the box. We'll have to put the photo up here to show you. But I think that perhaps it came from knowing the vineyard a little bit more. Maybe it came from the rest of us trying something a little bit different. But I do think that out of the 4 of them, perhaps the Mount Edward was the most seamless and tightly bound wine that will stand a bit more of a test of time than perhaps the other 3.
I think for me, it actually shows his experience with the vineyard. Yeah, he actually, like, as much as, I hate to say it, he knew what he was doing, and he executed it really well. So, and I think it does show in the wine, is that it is probably the most complete of the four
Yes.
examples. The other three of us definitely in there. We went down a pathway because we were trying to learn something, and they're quite different expressions as a result of it. But you can definitely see Duncan had his Yoda cap on when he was busy telling us that we could all do what we like.
Oh, I can't imagine that happening at all. Right, very good. Hey, we've got some brilliant comments here. So before we come back to what next for the four of you, and are you going to do something together again like this? I'll just read you and share some of the comments here because they are very good. Brilliant idea and extremely educational, and I think it certainly has been hugely educational. So thank you for that. Then we've got someone who really liked Ben's version too. Someone that like Mr. Glover and Mount Edward. Right, next. Oh my God, I love this. Totally replicating this for my friends at New Year's. What a fabulous idea and such variety in the results, which I think has been the really cool thing to see through this. Matt has said he's learned a lot here, such different styles, but all enjoyable. We'll definitely be looking for these. Matt, I do have to tell you, there's only one place you can buy them. I told you at the beginning of a tasting, I was excited about this. All of the production is at Glengarry. So don't look, just come to Glengarry. You'll be fine. Then we've got someone going with Mr. Glover in round 2, agree with Maude for round 1, but super educational. Many thanks for sharing such an interesting tasting. Wonderful wines. After tonight, I need to drink more Pinot. I'm really delighted, Marianne, that that's the case. And I think we've got a whole heap of people here that will be saying the same thing. Then another comment that really enjoyed Mr. Glover in the second round, structure that filled the mouth, powered right down the center of my tongue and just kept going. The different approach from Dicey was really interesting and really loved the relaxed format and constructive comments, learnt heaps. So there we go, lots of fantastic comments. So what we need to know is, are you going to do the same thing again, or, oh no, SK, what are you going to do? Or am I heading to Duncan? No. I know who's organising this.
He's just going to change the vineyard.
Yeah. No home court advantage. Yeah, it's a vineyard none of us have worked with before.
But it has been like lovely comments tonight, but it actually has been really educational for us as well. And we've learned so much, and we've really enjoyed the whole, one of the bonuses from doing something like this is that we do get together and we do get to thrash out ideas about what we think about Pinot, but that doesn't need to be constrained to just Pinot. So that's something that we're really looking at. The boys will tell you if it was me, our next version will be a Chardonnay. But we're still deliberating, but definitely F.W.A. We think it's something we'd like to continue.
Wow, as you know, it's something that we'd like you to continue as well, and I'm very happy that you continue and keep sending it to us to sell. It's a wonderful concept. Right, have we got, and actually someone's just commented, for those who are on the tasting and are in Auckland, thanks for the prep for Freedom Day tomorrow. Don't know that we're quite at Freedom Day, but we're getting close.
I think from down here in Central Otago, we all just want to say thanks to those in lockdown in Auckland, and all of those who've been
the hard yards,
staying at home and doing hard yards. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Don't think it's not talked about in that fashion down here. It's more than appreciated.
Yeah.
So thanks very much.
Thanks. Yeah, we're certainly looking forward to a few more freedoms tomorrow. It's been, I think when one of my teams started counting days, I suggested they stopped. And the morning they told me how many minutes they'd been in lockdown, I decided we'd clearly been in lockdown too long.
Was that
very long time.
Yeah.
Cool. So folks, that is the end of a tasting, and I'm sure in a second you can unmute yourself and welcome to ask any questions directly if you'd like. But I would like to just say a really big thank you to Ben, Duncan, SK and Matt for joining us tonight and taking us through the wines. Absolutely fantastic. And for coming up with the concept. You know, as I said at the beginning, it took me 2 seconds to go, yep, that's just brilliant, need to be involved. And, you know, sitting here and listening to you all tonight and tasting through the wines, super pleased we did, because that's a really, really impressive lineup of wines, all of them. And I know we've had lots of banter back and forward on preferences here. But for me, it'd be a little bit like when someone says to me, you know, what's your favorite style of wine? And I ask them what the occasion is. And it's a little bit like that with these. I can find an occasion where I'm going to prefer each one of these. So fantastic, thank you. And if you're wondering where you can purchase these wines, and you perhaps missed my shameless plug for that before, the wines are at Glengarry. So they're in a 4-pack. So does anyone have a box there in Central? Do you have a box, Matt? Okay, let's do a show and tell. So we've got this box. All right. Oh, look at that. So a 4-pack with the wines that you've just tasted tonight in it. So, sorry, I didn't catch his name. Oh, look, and the labels. And the other side.
And Duncan, extremely young picture.
Do you know, Duncan, every time you send us that picture to use in something, our design manager, asks me if anything more current.
You mean that in that
just keep using it. Just like in 25 years, we'll still be using the same picture.
What do you mean?
He never ages.
None of that's true to everybody listening.
And I have to say, guys, there was lots of customers out there who were so pumped about tonight's tasting that we actually clearly didn't do a good enough job of explaining how the tasting was going to work, because they didn't realize they were getting any sample bottles with their ticket. They just went out and brought the 4-pack of wines and paid $45 just to hear you guys talk. And then we're like, oh, we've actually got some sample wines to taste, and now we've got this 4-pack of wines that we could drink at another time. So that's how keen people were to taste these with you.
Awesome.
I mean, thank you, and I'm sure on behalf of all of us, you know, when you do get out and about, we've all got places you can come and visit. So please don't be strangers. Tell us that you keyed into the tasting. Tell us who you are, and we'll welcome you at all hours, I'm sure. Well, 9 to 5 midweek. Only. But otherwise,
that's why more welcoming. Yeah, croquettes in the weekend.
Yeah. With a free croquette.
Yeah, that's right.
But we will be doing. Thank you very much for taking it on. It's brilliant. But perhaps also James probably needs another thank you. Without him kicking us all in the bum and getting us organised, this may not have come to fruition as quickly, and we probably needed that as well. So hats off to Mr. Barber for that. And it's been brilliant.
Really to understand how little work he had to do, though, convincing Liz. Thank you for that, Liz.
I was going to say, organising you all was absolutely seamless. As you can tell from tonight's tasting, folks. Cool. So I'm just going to stop the recording now, but your